We have a quorum. That being the case, call to order the last meeting of the Water Resource Protection Task Force under the auspices of the Select Board of Manchester. As you remember, our mission was to look at the strategies required to ensure quality and quantity of drinking water for Manchester for the next 50 years. And from where I sit, we've done a great job of that analysis and strategy and recommendations. So that's where I'll start. And any announcements from anybody on the task force before we plunge into the agenda? All right. Sue, what's our first real item here?
It's to review and approve the minutes from our last meeting on June 14th.
All right. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes from June 14th? Hearing none, could I hear a motion to accept them?
I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes as presented for the June 14th meeting.
Thanks. A second. Seconded by Mr. Lumsden. All those in favor, make an indication with hand or voice if you are a member. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor. Anyone opposed? Gordon and Olga, I assume your hands are just up.
My hand is up. I just,
Sorry,
my,
that was an approval.
my computer is
Okay,
not
then it is-
recognizing my camera, sorry.
It is unanimous. Thank you. Next item.
Updates. So the first is the select board vote on the proposed new water rates.
All right. Is there anyone on the call unaware of the actions of the select board on Monday night? So I will invite any comment from the task force. If
Yeah, can you
anybody cares to.
Can you summarize what the conclusion was?
Yes, they did not accept our recommendation for new rates. Instead, they voted a 2.5% increase across the board for all users, residential, commercial, and other, and expressed an interest in revisiting the question of conservation rates in September. I think they also informally, or perhaps as part of their motion, agreed that I'm not sure, some fraction of the households using water should get a bill that contains both the actual amount of their bill and a what if number that would reflect what they would be paying had the select board change the rates.
Yeah.
Does that sound accurate to you, John?
Yeah,
Round and Harrison?
I think it does, Steve. I don't think that was necessarily a hard and fast comment. I think the concern of the select board was more with regard to notification about the changes in advance of when the changes would take place. And I'm pretty confident that the changes that we have recommended will be adopted in the October 1st quarter. They wanted to have people know in advance that that was the story. And of course, the letter that we sent out to the top 20%, which represents pretty much all of the people for whom the rate changes would affect them, that has already been done. I think that sending out a bill that also shows exactly what people would be paying going forward, I don't know that that's necessarily going to be required. And of course, the whole purpose of this initiative is conservation, such that the bills that these people would be paying going forward would be less because we would expect that they would consume less. But I'm pretty optimistic that October 1st we will have a change in rates, and it will be very close, if not exactly what we have recommended.
Also, John, there were some good points made about we didn't have the details in there for the commercial accounts and multifamily, dividing it out. So I think that should be specified.
I agree with you 100%, Jeff. Yeah, they were a little concerned that we were sitting there saying, well, we're going to look at all of this stuff. And they would have preferred that we'd already looked and we know what our policy is and how is that codified. So we have some time to make all of that happen in the next couple of months, I think.
And I didn't mention this then, but I mean, if we do send out this fake bill and real bill, for lack of a better term,
Yes,
I think it should be sent to everybody if it goes to anybody.
yes, I think you're probably right. A lot of people will see their numbers go down a little bit, of course, but I think if you've got to do it for a few people from a computer perspective, you can do it for everybody.
Any other comments?
Hey,
I'll just
Steve,
check.
Steve,
Yeah,
just one
just,
question. When are we
Can I
allowed
just
to?
conclude with, can I conclude
Oh,
with the
yes, sir.
task force before we move on to the public? Thanks. I'll just comment that we initially briefed the select board on this conservation rate change in April. We elaborated it in May and we answered their questions in June. Then in response to their concern about notification, we notified 400 households that the change was occurring. So, and we did that under what I thought was a pretty strong assurance that these would be voted in effective July 1. So I was frankly stunned by the decision, but I understand that reasonable people can differ, and perhaps the prediction of October 1st will be more accurate. I certainly hope so. Yes, go ahead.
Hey, Steve, sorry, I was actually I am ready to say or ask a question, but I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was trying to just didn't know like when it was appropriate to ask questions. That's all I was gonna ask. But so
I
now
just wanted to go around the task force first. Please go ahead.
okay, all right.
Can you identify yourself for the record?
Sure. Philip Furs, 8 Blossom Lane.
Thanks.
Okay. So Steve, one thing that I took to heart from, I think it was you on the other call, but I was distracted the other night. That says, hey, we've been at this for a long time and you should have shown up. So that's what I'm trying to do here is kind of at least weigh in and listen to what's going on. I've tried to edify myself in the last little bit about what you guys were tasked with, the rates, the actual ramifications and the end game. And so when I was looking through the task force, when I was looking at what the board of selectmen tasked you guys with, and then I look at what you produced, and I was on an email exchange, I think you were too, with my wife, and I think Chuck responded with something to the effect of the goal was to reduce water consumption. I don't know if that's the only goal, but it was one of the goals. What I'd like to understand is sort of, and this will feed into a couple other points, is like to what end, like why are we trying to, and then just want to understand like to what end are we trying to consume less water? Like obviously less consumption of using a resource that's being depleted, that like if we're running out of the water in 10 years time, we got to figure out how to save it or like extend it. I get it, the useful life of it, but what is our task? Why are we trying to reduce water consumption right now?
There's a couple things. One, that's not the only thing, like you pointed out, but reducing water consumption is, I mean, I think it's fairly well known that conservation is important. All you have to do is look back to last summer. So Gravelly Pond was down 6 or 7 feet last summer. So if that happened 2 years in a row, I'm not sure where we'd be exactly.
But we have, but that's not, I mean, with all due respect, there has to be a net. You're trying to consume less to achieve an end result, and consuming less just for the sake of consuming less. Well, I guess
This may not be an answer to your question, but have you read the final report? The 77
I did.
page?
I went through. Well, at the 77 page, I was able to read your summary. But you should be. I'm guessing you should be able to succinctly articulate in like 30 seconds what the goal is.
Yeah, I'd urge you to look at the working team. I think it's number 1 or 2, which was tasked with understanding usage
Another
and
thing we found
conservation.
out,
And you'll see in there the argument. It's not an opinion or political stance. It's a reality that Manchester is seriously out of whack in terms of our usage, in terms of our summer, winter usage, in terms of our unaccounted water. All of those things require attention, and conservation is one of the linchpins to fixing those. So take a look at
Yeah,
it. You'll
but-
see all the data
I will, but-
analysis.
but-
You'll see how it threads in and connects to the other. So I don't want to
I will, but
get in an argument with you. So could you and I take
I'm
this
not ar-
offline? Yeah,
we can't accept it ties in. So I actually want to tie it in a little bit because first of all, the problem is you're trying to convince the community that, hey, we should do this. If you have to read a 77-page document that this is the way that you can't articulate in less than 30 seconds, that in of itself
Yeah,
is
we
a problem.
can. We're not
Okay, what is
understanding what your point is.
can I ask you to take, Phil, seriously, can I ask you to take this offline? This is not the time to argue the conclusions. We've reached them already. We aired them with the public. We tried to air them with the public many times. This, you say,
Okay,
7-page
Well-
document is
well,
not for the
we'll-
public.
That's fine. I'll
for the
move on
select
from,
board. The
that's fine, I'll
8-page
move on.
executive, 7-page executive summary is for the public.
that's fine. I'll move on from that, although I do think it's flawed
Okay.
to have not be able to articulate. Let me move on because it's an important point that actually Ann Harrison's husband does a great job. And I never look at the Manchester Woo, but he just posted like a very thorough thing, which I thought captured a lot of the issues. That's not, I don't need to rehash that. But if you haven't seen it yet, we popped it up 2 hours ago. It's very good. That I think it requires some thoughtful responses to. So but let's put that aside for a moment. I want to come back to the point about the system that you've incented to reduce consumption. So if we're going to go with the premise that we should reduce just absolute consumption, we do need to agree that you're not rewarding efficiency. Can we agree on that? You're rewarding less consumption.
Can I limit you to another minute? Because you've already taken 6. And this
Yeah, but
wasn't
this is,
meant
isn't
to
it?
be a
Is it?
public debate of our findings.
Well, but if we're trying to get to a better, I'm
So
trying
what
to
is
throw
your
out some
point, Phil? What
points
is-
that are very important to understand.
So what's your
I'm just,
point? What's your point? That it's not, just say in one sentence what you just said. What is your point? And then I'll respond.
so Jeff, yes, very simply, you're not rewarding efficiency, you're rewarding just less consumption,
Okay.
right?
Okay, we also talked about and discussed and suggested multiple forms of efficiency as well.
Okay, but you're not, that's not what that's the system you devise is not rewarding, right?
No.
It's by definition, like it's not debatable, it's just math.
That's one part of our.
Only 2 of our 12 or 13 recommendations have come before the select board so far. And this was the second one. So I urge you
Well,
to
it's a
look at the
pre-
rest of them, see how they.
I will,
connect,
but
see how they
it's a
enforce
very,
the
but it's a
strategy.
very significant one because you're actually, what you're doing is you're incenting more usage of 50% of the households, right? You actually are, that's what you're doing. You're making, I would argue look, let me just say, I'm all for paying more for usage. And I'm all for more for paying, I even can get on board with the progressive tax system, which effectively is kind of what it is. But the way that you've structured it is, I would argue, is overly rewarding for people that aren't necessarily efficient and overly penalizing people who may be efficient. And there's other methods you can do it, and to just simply say, hey, Phil, you're out of time is not being intellectually honest. And Steve, I'll take it offline with you and I'll debate. I'm not trying, I'll have a very, and I get people can have 2 different, reasonable minds can disagree, but
Go first.
and I'm fine doing that, but this is the forum I would imagine you actually should air these types
Okay,
of
so
discussion points.
would you agree to pass the mic to some other people tonight? Let's do that now.
Can we answer any of my
Scott,
questions?
you're-
Scott, can you just tell me, can we agree that element of you're not rewarding efficiency, you're rewarding just less consumption, which by definition penalizes people with larger households?
We sharply disagree as a group with that. And if you read the recommendations, you'll see why.
Yeah,
I-
Phil, I think you're looking at only one of the recommendations, and you have to look at all of them to see, some of them are efficiency, some of them are purely just straight use, but collectively, all of them also address efficiency. You just can't look at one. We're looking at the rates right now, and that is one tool in the toolbox that we're using. So you've got to look at it all in the aggregate to see, okay, are we really trying to encourage everybody to,
Thanks, John.
get to the
You said
point
that
we've
better
gotta
than I did.
yes.
May I switch the mic to Scott Horsley and Ann Harrison? They each had their hands up. Scott, go ahead.
Thanks, Steve. And I'll be brief here. Phil, I don't know how much you delved into this, but this is a huge critical subject here, and the town has two water supply sources. One is at pretty significant risk, that's the Lincoln Street well. PFAS is a huge issue. To be conservative, planning ahead, I think looking at the status of things and the water demand versus the water supply, I think it's pretty fair to say, in my experience, and I've worked all around the country for EPA on water systems, Manchester is in a tight spot here. There's no obvious third source for water. You may lose a supply, or you may have to add a lot of treatment. And some people are saying, let's just spend the money and do the treatment, and money's not an issue. And that may be true, but one logical first step in trying to conserve sources and trying to do with what you have, which is two water sources, is to make sure you're not pumping more water than you need to. And these two water supply wells are first and foremost for drinking water supply. During the summer months, almost half of it goes onto lawns. If you have plenty of extra water to burn and money's not an issue, that's a great idea. Manchester does not have a lot of extra water, and I think finances and money are issues. So that is the efficiency that is here. Using water that you don't have to water lawns, large lawns, is highly inefficient. So I would suggest that this proposal is very much focused on efficiency of delivering safe drinking water, which I think everybody on this call, everybody would agree that is the foremost importance. And that's what the committee is focused on. Those have been the recommendations. So I think that needs to be taken into account.
Well, Scott, I think your point
And
is very well, very
This
well.
isn't-
I mean,
With all due
let me
respect, Phil, this is not a debate. This is a meeting. Ann Harrison
All
is
right.
next with the mic.
Hey,
Go ahead,
Scott,
Ann.
thank you, Scott.
There is a lot of water. The state is coming up with, the federal government is coming up with new standards, which will put all of our water supply, and I think everybody's water supply, in violation of the PFAS regulation, their new PFAS regulations. So it's not a question of we can conserve water now and avoid PFAS. We have to plan on dealing with removing PFAS from our water. And that really is all I have to say at the moment.
I think we all agree with that.
But conserving water isn't going to make any difference.
Well, we disagree on that, but fair enough. Ben,
Excuse me, would you please explain how using less water is going to reduce the PFAS in our water?
well, I would refer it to Chuck, who's becoming very well versed, probably better than any of us, with the options for remediating PFAS. And filtering PFAS in the current water treatment plant for Gravelly Pond is a completely different problem from filtering PFAS in the Lincoln Street well. I don't want to go into the details that I understand, because I suspect they're outdated already, but Chuck is on this, and it's very clear that it will be far more expensive one way or another to remediate PFAS in the well at Lincoln Street than it will be at Gravelly Pond. And that being
we
the
hear from
case,
Chuck?
and Gravelly being our primary day in, day out annual water source, if there was a way to make us, say, independent of using the Lincoln Street well, we would have a great deal more options before we spend the kind of money that has been talked about for remediating Lincoln Street under any of the options. So that's one of the reasons why it would be very desirable to take maybe 25% of our usage down, at the same time to reduce our unaccounted for water and put in new meters, the whole package of things that are part of the recommendations of the task force. And I had hoped that that kind of systems analysis of water systems and capital budgeting and PFAS remediation would be clear to everybody, but clearly it isn't yet. Ben, you're next here. Could you identify yourself?
Hi, it's actually Mary Foley. I don't know why my son's name is on it. Thanks for taking my questions. As I try to understand this, I think some of it, for me at least, is messaging, because I'm hearing a lot of different things, that we have an abundance of water, that we might need to take Lincoln Street well offline, PFAS, you know, third source, those types of things. So maybe if there's some more messaging going out to folks saying exactly why the conservation is happening, I think there's some disconnect. And we are hearing clearly it's an irrigation issue, and I might not know enough at this point, but why is this first step then not targeting, which a lot of people have, the second meter that usually is just for irrigation, that doesn't use for drinking water and sewage. So it's just that, like, for the outside meter, I know we get billed separately. Why wouldn't that be the first phase to target? Because that would definitely target the irrigation, and or coupled with seasonal summer rates like so many towns around us do. Thank you.
Anybody in the task force want to give a quick answer about irrigation and the need for conservation? Well, I'll say then that these rates are targeted directly at outdoor irrigation. They're not designed to penalize or discriminate against large families or to entrap people who've just put in new lawns. They're designed to reduce consumption by reducing the high-end consumption, the 200 or 300 households that are using extensive amounts of water, and most of whom do not have irrigation or deduct meters because they're not on the sewer system. I also need to say, this is complicated stuff. I didn't appreciate how complicated it was until we got maybe 6 months into our work. And I think that's the reason why it was a very sound idea to create a task force and to allow us to gather 20 volunteers, many of whom worked very diligently on the subjects of contamination, of additional sources, of inter-town collaboration, on usage, on citizen attitudes. You know, the saying in consulting is you really don't want to buy the dog and bark yourself. And a lot of the miscommunication and messaging problems that Mary's referring to, I think, are people trying to second guess or challenge facts and data collected by the task force. You can certainly come up with different rates based on those facts and data, but I don't think you can escape the fact that one way or another you have to deal with the irrigation bump, as Scott just said. Anybody else want to speak up at this point? All right, what's next on our agenda, Sue?
Feedback from the letter from the top 20% of water users.
Okay, well, John, do you want to kick that off?
Yes, I can, Steve, and I will say we got, what do we got, about 60 or 70 responses from that letter. I will say that the most common response is most of those folks wanted to participate in the pilot study. But I would say the second most common response is that most people felt that the initiative that we were working on here was a good idea. And of course, that's what we've been pushing around here for the past, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes. But in general, the comments were quite positive that it is a good initiative to try and reduce the water consumption in town, because Manchester is definitely an outlier. But the number one issue was pilot. There were a number of scattered ones, and I don't have the responses in front of me, Steve, but I know that those were the top two. I would say the next one was, well, how does this affect me? And I know that Steve has answered many of those questions with, well, here's your historic 10-year rate, and here's what it would be under the new rates. I think that everybody needs to understand that the overall objective here is to reduce water, and that analysis that Steve provided was a static analysis. The intention is that people would reduce their water so that whatever he came up with for numbers would somehow be reduced, because we're encouraging people to use less water. And of course, this letter was sent to the top 20%, and that's virtually certainly all of the people who are significant irrigators here in town. So the message is we hope that irrigation gets reduced, therefore reducing our water consumption, which, as I said, is a little bit high. But Steve, I don't know, do you want to comment on a couple of the other?
Yeah, John, thank you. That's really complete. Let me just share the slide I showed on Monday night that summarizes this. Can you see this slide?
Yep.
Yeah, that's on.
So as John said, the top three responses were, yes, I want to participate in pilot testing, which was usually elaborated with sort of, this is a good idea. I want to be in the forefront of conservation and technology. Second was, what are these rates? And third was, I don't think of myself as a heavy water user. How did I end up in the top 20%? And the specific was, can you show me my 10-year history of usage? Which, as John said, I did send out about 50 emails with 10-year history and the what if attached to it, current rates versus proposed rates. There were a variety of other responses in less frequently. Some people said, you know, we're already on the path of conservation. What else do we do? People had technical questions. Are we all going to get smart water meters? What if, you know, we test two different kinds and you decide to choose the other one? Do I have to get it replaced twice? Will the proposed rates affect my outside irrigation meter? Are the sewer rates going up? You know, I have a tenant. You know, how did you come up with this? If you've done your homework, where can I read the task force findings? This number 11, as you heard a little bit from Philip first, isn't this really just a tax increase aimed at larger properties? And finally, what if, you know, what if this doesn't work? And the good news is that we anticipated all of these questions and we have answers for them. And to tell the truth, we had answers, I thought, confirmed by Greg Federspiel and Chuck Dam earlier Monday to deal with commercial rates and multi-unit houses. We didn't discuss the school. So that's an area where would have required some after the fact editing or changing or rebating. But I thought we'd done our homework. And the questions that came back indicated that. I have to say, I did hear, this is anecdotal, but it's kind of interesting. I did hear from two people who are in the top 3 users most years, both residential, obviously. One of them quite concerned, quite adamant that this might be just a disguised kind of wealth transfer mechanism from people with larger properties to people without large properties, and very much against it. The second person said, you know, go for it. I love the technology idea of smart water meters. And frankly, I've been trying to understand my water usage. I think I've cut it in half over the past 5 years, which in fact they had, although it's still rather gigantic. And they were asking for more help. So I can't generalize from that sample of 2, but I was struck by the fact that 2 of the very largest users of drinking water for irrigation came back with such disparate responses. It's clear that not everybody's going to like paying more for water or having to examine options for conservation, but we knew that going into. Hope that's helpful. Any other comments on reactions to the letter which announced the rate changes as well as the pilot test?
Steve, just one thing for you and everyone else. We've also talked about, you know, these being conservation rates, and one of the things that we'd like to do is to partner with Greenscapes and get information from Greenscapes that goes out on water conservation with the water bills in a certain quarter, just so everybody would get that information. We could have it available at town meeting for people to pick up. We could get it distributed with town reports, or we could include it in the water meter mailing. And I can't remember what grade it is. Maybe Jeff knows, but I know one of the grades in the Memorial School does a 1 or 2 day program with Greenscapes in, well, as we approach this winter into spring season. And this is not the first year they've done that, to try and get the youth in the grades to think about water conservation also.
Yeah, and as Chuck points out in the chat, we are a member of the town is a member of Greenscapes Coalition. We have access to that information. In fact, one of our members, Peter Colarusso, has procured at no cost many copies of the basic Greenscapes brochure, which is for homeowners, essentially about outdoor usage
And
of
Chuck-
water. And
Sorry, Chuck mentioned also they pay the bill for Greenscapes, which is a big benefit to the school, a big cheap benefit to the school, because they then sponsor those programs that Tom referred to.
and not to blow his horn, but I'll do it because he doesn't often do it himself. Chuck also mentioned that it would probably be useful to offer to the largest water users kind of a forensic audit of their usage. Because one of the possibilities, given the age of some of the properties that we're talking about here, is that their own internal water system is just as leaky and loses as much water, maybe more, than a counterpart public system. And if that's the case, it's to everybody's benefit to find that out. With smart digital water meters, it's possible to actually track that down pretty quickly, along with some other techniques that Chuck has. And that is one of the implementation steps we're hoping to do, in concert with conservation rates and greenscapes and other forms of education and information. This is, I should say, this is not a one and done kind of thing. We're not going to just change rates, congratulate each other, and go on to conservation. This is chess, not checkers. It's a long game, and changing people's behavior, particularly with something like this, which is essentially very low interest but very important. Any consumer products expert or service expert will tell you that that's going to take some time, and that's going to require some commitment, some energy, and engagement. Jessica, your hand is up.
Thanks, Steve. I just want to say too, I just, for public who's on tonight, we haven't had a lot of public attend. I don't think, as a gardener myself, I don't think any of us are saying that we're telling people you're never going to be able to water your plants and have a garden. And, I think I want to be careful about that. But there's a lot of ways people could be far more efficient, even with their watering of, if we can help educate people not, running sprinklers in the middle of the day. And, I wish there was a way I could use non-potable water to do my watering, but since we don't have that option yet. So I guess I just want to be clear, we're not sort of saying that we're anti-gardens and anti-plants and but that we're hoping we can work with people to learn more efficient ways to do their watering as well. So I just kind of felt like I wanted to get that point in there.
Really glad you made that point. Just as I think as a group, we're not anti-large families. Speaking as someone with 4 children, that would be disingenuous on my part. Karen Bennett, your hand is up.
Yes, Karen Bennett, 28 Lincoln Street. My question is about the town. The town has irrigation. What are we doing to focus on what the town is doing to potentially stop that? That could help. I'm assuming there's big portions that we have irrigation on, if somebody can address that.
Invite Chuck if you
We got
feel up to it.
irrigation.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear, Chuck.
Yep. So we do have irrigation on some properties, not all of them. Like the Sweeney has irrigation. The field that we just built on Pine Street has irrigation. That was, I guess when we did the town common, on the other hand, we completely did not do irrigation, and so it's kind of a mixed bag, I guess. We we do meter it. We already turned it off this year because we've been getting so much rain. So, it really is kind of a use case basis, and we try and manage it that way. I guess I don't know if there's other questions. I don't think we're wasteful in our irrigation use, but the numbers that I've seen, it's not like a massive amount of water that is used. Look up, bud. Sorry, I have a buddy here.
Yeah, from the analysis of households and businesses and commercial, nonprofit and governmental units that have meters, none of those town uses rose into the top 10% of users. So it's not an area where we would focus the same kind of attention we would on the top residential users or the 3 or 4 commercial users that are up in the same level.
Yeah, and I'd say we're open to changing our, our use. It's just a matter of, for on the municipal end, especially, just like people with large lawns or whatever, we have to budget for it, we have to plan for it, and we have to, prepare for, kind of all the different scenarios that we might face. So, certainly we want to protect our investment for the Pine Street field with, making sure that it's a playable field. That was the whole intent. But if, we just let it turn brown and, concrete, like that's not the intent. So, it's a use case issue.
As
And I
far
should
as-
also remark that the Conservation Commission has begun at least querying every new project that involves a lot of landscaping as to how they're going to irrigate, if at all. We don't have any policy against or in favor of irrigation yet. We're just trying to collect some information. But we did spend a lot of time focused on the new small scale athletic field on Pine Street on the old burn dump. Because the initial plan was to have what are called water cannons, which are a very quick way to water, particularly when you're bringing in your lawn for the first time. But they lose a great deal of the water to evaporation. So Nate DeRoser and Chuck and the team went back and rethought that and came back with a Rainbird solution that offers, since it's up to date, considerable improvement in the efficiency of using water, less evaporation, less runoff.
As far as saving water goes, the town has probably made the most progress simply in finding and fixing leaks around town.
Amen. And your hand is up again?
Yeah.
You want to unmute? Yeah.
The most recent data I have from Chuck says that our unaccounted water has gone from more than 25% to about 8.7%. Some of that is recognizing water use by the town, which had not been considered. A major factor, in fact, I believe it's 10% of the treated water is used by the wastewater treatment plant to back flush their filters. That can be done with the product of their treatment, the water that comes out of their treatment. That would reduce Manchester's potable water consumption by 10%. It would also decrease our sewer outflow, which is the limit of how much our sewage treatment plant can handle. So that is a major win, and bringing the unaccounted water down from over 25% to 8.7 is not just a question of fixing leaky pipes. It's a question of studying what we've done. And I think Chuck and the whole DPW deserve a great deal of credit for that.
Yes. We gave them a round of applause at a meeting a couple of months ago for that very breakthrough finding. Of course, you still have to fix the recycled water system in the wastewater treatment plant.
And I'm going to make a plea to everybody who's on this call. I hope we will have an article on the annual town meeting warrant to upgrade the wastewater treatment plant, not just to use less potable water, but also to keep it from, say, flooding. And I think people who are interested in water should consider seriously voting for that change.
Amen. Thank you.
So just as a question back to you through Steve, I believe initially that our percentage of unaccounted for water was higher than 25%, say 10 plus years ago. And the way that it was knocked down mostly was that cutting the I&I, and that happened on the replacement of the pipes on the lower portion of Beach Street by Reed Park and those running around the inner harbor. And when we did that, then we reduced our unaccounted for water by about 50%. Now, that doesn't mean the percentage was down, but we just cut what the percentage was down, but we did cut back that. Since then, Chuck and Nate working together have done an awful lot of work to continue keeping those numbers in the right direction. Is that how your understanding?
If I may.
I think that's directed at you, Ann. Go ahead.
Yes, that's my understanding, that over the past 10 years or so, the major sources of both lost freshwater and incursion of water into the sewage system have been, there's been a great deal of work very successfully fixing both of those. We've got the fixing the wastewater treatment plant is the next big step.
Good.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to comment here? And what's next on our agenda, Sue?
The status of the smart meter pilot test.
Well, I'll say what I know and then maybe Chuck or John can update. We have a lot of volunteers. I think the number is now approaching 100 households that have expressed willingness, sometimes eagerness to participate, and we figure we need a couple dozen. So we'll do some intelligent selection within that list. I think we now can be sure we'll get a representative slice of users in terms of size of property, prior usage, size of family, other things that we might want to include in it. And I'll just mention that an email came in today, which is lengthy and well thought out, and it's basically an argument advocating for a particular household getting one of the digital water meters, and it's quite convincing. So I'm impressed by the engagement of some small fraction now. 100 out of 2,000 users isn't it's not enough to go to the bank, but it's a significant number. John, did you have any further on the pilot test?
No, I think you summarized it well. We have to kind of narrow down, I think, the criteria that we want to use to select these folks. And I'm not sure where Chuck and Nate are with regard to the input that they've got from their water folks and them as to people that they would like to use. But I think that we're in a position to start to make some decisions on this within the next week or so. We're really very close. And Chuck, could you provide us with some sort of a timeline as to how you see this rolling out, given all the information you've got? Because we really are in a position where we can make some decisions now.
Yeah, so I did, my guys are out investigating. So the kind of thing that, not other people are concerned about, but I am, is the size of the meter and also the location. So, we weren't really planning on doing a lot of large meters as part of this. And we weren't really planning on getting into a whole bunch of pit meter applications, which are harder to read in general and kind of a special case, and usually, as you can guess, more expensive. So anyway, I was having them vet that list in terms of some of that stuff. Now, maybe we can, we can take on a few of those. It will change the pricing, but Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but the task force was going to put some of their extra dollars into the meter pilot program anyway. So it's not just coming out of.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It's all coming out of you guys. So
I would not limit it based upon cost issues, Chuck. We're in a position to provide some dollars if you want to use those larger diameter hookups.
Yeah. And then the only other thing that we need to take into consideration, we can't be plumbers. So we need to make sure that, there's shut off valves and stuff like that work on all these locations. So there's a little bit to it. So anyway, my guys are on it. They should be going around, if not the end of this week, hopefully early next week. We can make sure there's none. I guess with that in mind, I'll take a first crack at kind of narrowing the list down. Steve, I think I only have 70 on mine. It might have been early iteration of what you sent. So if you have 100, you want to send me the most up-to-date list, I'll take a look at that.
Sure. Well, frankly, you're staring at a good fraction of the difference. Most of the members of the task force
I guess
previously
if they
said,
weren't
yes,
on if they weren't on the list, they didn't make
they
it
weren't
to
on the list
my
yet.
guy's eyes.
No, that list just came from responses to the letter.
Yeah, exactly.
Plus, I think I put one or two of yours and Greg's nominees in there. And judging from the email I received today, we might be able to auction off the right to test pilot test water meters. Sorry, that's a joke. That's not something we want to venture into, I don't think.
I got it, Steve.
Okay, any other comments on the water meter pilot test? Okay, it bears repeating that we are not in the vanguard here by any means. A good fraction, maybe a majority of the towns in eastern Massachusetts, when they've come to need to replace the majority of their water meters, residential and commercial, have switched to these so-called smart meters, which have few or no moving parts and much more sophisticated methods of sending their data, which enable real time and smartphone apps and things like that. Okay, next on our agenda.
Working group updates, if any.
This is just a placeholder. We have this every 3 weeks when we meet, but I suspect nothing specific, although I throw the floor open for anybody from the working groups to chime in. Well, there is one thing. This is regarding contaminants. I've been in touch with Gordon about it, and also I've mentioned it to Chuck Dam. There's a startup company that claims to have a system of, as they say, decapitating the carbon fluorine bond that characterizes PFAS. This is, in fact, part of the holy grail of remediating PFAS. So most of the approaches today are simply to trap it in a filter, and that requires a pretty sophisticated filter and a very well-run filtration process. And by the way, you have to clean out most of the typical large-scale contaminants like silt and sand and iron and manganese before you hit the fine filter. So that's part of the challenge that we all thought we were facing. If these folks are correct, then you have a solution that you might apply directly to the water. So it could be treatment in the well, could be treatment in the reservoir, could be treatment just upstream of the filters. And I have to say, I had the conversation, it sounded a little bit like Elizabeth, what's her name, and Theranos, just way too good to be true. And I expected to hear, this is going to 6 months and 12 NDAs you have to sign and $500,000 for your bench test. But no, the compounds are ready and they are prepared to send the compounds to Chuck and Nate for what's called a jar test, which is the simplest. It's literally what it sounds like. It's testing your water in a jar with the proper temperature and agitation and anything else that you need to do to activate the process. So when last I spoke to Chuck, his indication was, let's try that, and no harm in it. There's a lot of hoops to jump through between a successful jar test and actually using something new on a potable water supply, because as Chuck put it, anything that touches drinking water is highly regulated, federal and state. So it's just kind of an early possibility, but an interesting one. And if Manchester is the first to jar test our drinking water, at least in the United States, that I think would be a good thing.
Hi, Mr. Gang. Is it possible to make a public comment? Because I was not able to raise my hand.
Sure. Thank you for speaking up. Is it Sarah Pierce?
Yes. Yes, it is Sarah Pierce, 9 Friend Street. So I'm just curious, if you need to get a permit to put a curb cut or an entryway to a driveway in, and you need to do all the above in a buffer zone, why are we not monitoring the spraying of poisonous chemicals on all the lawns that are leaching into our drinking waters, or drinking water rather, in town? Thank you.
Good question. I suspect the first answer is because we don't have bylaws or state laws or policies that govern those particular applications or protect the resources.
Yeah, so
So the
I did,
question is, what could it be done under any existing laws or bylaws, local bylaws?
yes, well, I did speak to the EPA and they said it was handled on a local level. And it is concerning because we do live within the buffer zone. And just to put in a simple concrete or asphalt apron needs to be barriered and whatnot, but to spray poisonous chemicals that are leaching right into our drinking water. Sawmill Brook, we abut that on Friend Street. It's abutted on the other streets surrounding us. There are no bylaws, and I think that's something we need to really consider when we're concerned about PFAS, drinking water, contamination, and in general, we need to look at that. It's a very serious issue, and the companies that come into our town and actually talk to residents and try to talk them into spraying these chemicals on our lawns and our air. We do not do that. We use nothing on our own lawns. We use our organic compounds only. But I think they need to register with the town. And I think we need to know what's being sprayed and used in our town and in our neighborhoods, because this is extremely important and more harmful than putting in an asphalt apron.
Yeah, your
In
point is well
general.
taken. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank
And
you very much. Thank you for
I guess I'd
listening.
encourage you at the practical level, if you have time, please pursue this both with the Conservation Commission and probably with
I
the
have, and I
stream
would
team.
love to pursue that with you. And I thank you for all the time you spend on this, and I will definitely do that. Thank you very much.
Okay, because if it's going to fall into existing town commissions and boards, it would probably be somewhere between Stream Team and Concom.
Thank you very much. I will.
You're welcome. Thanks for the comment. Anybody else? Okay, if there are no other updates, what's next on our agenda?
Corrections to the final report of findings and recommendations, then vote to approve.
Thank you. So I won't force everyone to confess whether or not they've read all 77 pages. I will say that at least one person has, and John Brown reported to me a significant typo, which is one of the subheadings got repeated in the wrong place. So that's been fixed. But I would welcome anybody who has found something that is incorrect or an area where we're missing something useful. Obviously, we couldn't include the full text of any of the reports, although we did excerpt most of the contaminants team report and most of the usage team report and most of Scott Horsley and Dana Truslow's reports. So which accounts for the length. Any suggestions? I think silence is a good sound here. Well, then I can say that not just the number of pages, but the depth of the work is, I've said this before in public, very impressive. It compares really favorably with the kinds of work I saw done, by the McKinseys and Deloitte's of the world, and that I did myself as part of Boston Consulting Group. Difference being in this case, the consulting team was a bunch of volunteers and just happily highly engaged and very well trained in their specialties.
And
So,
you
bravo.
don't often get the same volunteer 30 years later.
True.
Scott.
True. Although we have a couple of serious repeat offenders on the task force. I mentioned Helen Bethel and Tom
that's
Kehoe
right.
and Fred Wales and a few other people whose names have turned up for decades already in this issue and others. All right. So could I hear a motion to approve the final report?
You have a motion from me to approve the final report, Steve, and I'm confident that it will survive the test of time. That the people that come back and look at this 30 years from now, when they want to update it, will look that we had a good deal of foresight in our recommendations.
Thank
I'll second
you.
Mr. Round's motion.
Motion. All right, properly moved and seconded. All those in favor on the task force indicate with a virtual or physical hand raise. I see 1, 2, 3,
Aye from me.
Aye
4,
from me.
5, 6,
How do I
7,
Raise your
8.
hand
How?
That physical.
this way.
Yeah, just Helen, you can just do what I'm doing.
Looking for the symbol. He's telling you to do what he's doing.
I think that's everybody, but is there anyone opposed? Let me just ask that. It appears not, so it is unanimous. Thanks for that. And now we can officially submit this to the select board and anyone else who wants to read it. What's next, Sue?
Acknowledgement and recognition of task force accomplishments.
Okay, well, part of my work as a consultant and as a organizational researcher in my career was came up with the same conclusion about what one of the things that's missing in most organizations and most projects, and that is sufficient acknowledgement and appreciation for the people doing the work. So I don't think it's possible to praise all of you enough, and I probably have been a little heavy-handed in doing so, but I think there's a good purpose for that. It's been a bang-up job. I can't think of an area which we just left hanging because we didn't have time or people didn't spend enough energy on it. And that included some areas that were. Sorry about the background noise here. Thank you. That included some areas that were devilishly hard to pin down. Underground storage tanks come to mind, which is a difficult subject to research. It's very difficult to follow the policy. It goes back decades. But that, along with lots and lots of other particular subjects, were really well handled by the team. So, as they say in the Navy, bravo Zulu. Good job. And don't be embarrassed. You can chime in here if you want to single out anybody. There's a lot of credit to be shared here.
Steve, I think all of us should single out you. We all owe you a debt of gratitude in terms of everything that's been accomplished here, your organizational skills in pulling together all of the details that need to be here and keeping us on message and touching all of the bases. I've never seen a greater competence, to be honest. I really have not. And I think that all of us really owe you a lot of thanks in that regard. You persevered.
And you made it enjoyable and humorous.
Yes.
Yeah, well, Jeff, you played a role in that. Those walks around Gravelly Pond were they were educational, but they were also a blast. I'll never quite forget the picture of Jeff wading out to do a subsurface sample, which is easy to do in the portions of the pond that kind of have a beach. But he was in the very marshiest, full of reeds, 6 inches of muck section of the pond. And there he was. And he invited all the rest of us to join him, and we all declined that one. So yeah, that part has been a lot of fun. Ron, is it your hand up?
He's just applauding.
Oh, it's a moving hand. Thank you. I got it.
Sorry, just applauding.
Oh, I appreciate it on behalf of everybody else. We should probably also spend a moment to recognize the contribution of 3 people who, didn't volunteer for this, and that would be Chuck Dam and Nate DeRozier and Sue Croft. It would have fallen across our work would have crossed Chuck's desk early and often, and it did. But I'm sure you remember a year and a half ago, Chuck coming forward with what has got to be one of the best introductions to a project on a problem set that I've seen from a client ever. So that launched us in a lot of right directions. The other thing that struck me about both Chuck and Nate was that they're unafraid, they're courageous professionals. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I've worked with a lot of people who had, the more they get into their specialty, the less they are willing to consider changing, innovating, or creative kinds of thinking. And that is not the case with these guys. So faced with a problem like how are we going to solve PFAS in the Lincoln Street well, Chuck and Nate come up with 3 or 4 things that I don't think the rest of us would have thought of, for example, some of which could actually be much more efficient, cost efficient kinds of solutions. And then Sue Croft, who I don't know if she realized what she's getting into because she had just joined the town on a limited part-time basis, but she was seconded to the Water Resource Protection Task Force. You probably thought this was going to be like 1 or 2 meetings over a few months and we'd be done. But the truth is she's been wrangling agendas and minutes and votes and a bunch of other things really well. I don't think you just ladled praise on me, but I got to pass off a fair amount of it to Sue because I'm not that well organized. She is. And that's what you're seeing. Chuck, your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for the word, Steve. And like you, I want to say that, you know, I really appreciated working with everybody on this project. I do think it is kind of funny that both myself and Nate had kids, you know, after the task force has started and, you know, since before it ended. So, well, Nate's on the way. He wasn't in school today or in work today, and he probably won't be the next few months because they did go to the hospital. I don't know. I haven't got an update for anybody. I do think he should either name it, you know, like Chabaco or, you know, Lincoln or something along those lines to commemorate the effort. But yeah, and I will say, you know, that I do think that I haven't made it through all 77 pages, but I've been on enough of these meetings and been through the content enough to say that this was definitely a very involved and you know, professional level operation that you guys took on, and you know, I'm happy to be a part of it, but also you know, I really didn't do much of the work. It was all you guys. So it'll be interesting to see the next phase, I guess.
Exactly. I do kind of like the name Gravelly DeRosier. That's it's got a ring to it.
I hope.
And there was a point at which I thought we should rename this thing the Human Resource Production Task Force, because both of you were delivering, your wives were delivering babies.
I don't know if I made this joke earlier in this process, but one of my standing, you know, icebreaker things is that one of my professional and life goals is to build a dam and name it the Dam Dam. So if you guys think that there will be a dam in this process, or if we can work one in somewhere in the recommendations next time around, I'd like to put my name in the hat for that one.
You know, the Beavers have already done that in Sawmill, and it's right next to Field.
Yeah, right now I would say Coach Field, right there.
Yeah.
Get
What
the
could be
name,
better?
Chuck. Get them quick. I think we've all been fortunate to get the insight into the DPW, Chuck and Nate, through working here. I wish the entire town could see that, because you guys do an unbelievable job, and just you're kind of unknown to most. So we really appreciate that, and I hope everybody sees that over time.
We should also do a brief shout out to Scott Horsley and all the people he brought into our to help work with him. He's actually we if you want to blame somebody for this whole thing, you can blame Scott, because he wrote the report single-handedly back in 1989 that led to the first iteration of our task force, back then a committee, and to some significant changes like the zoning overlay districts. And remarkably, he came back for another bite at the apple.
The other thing I
go
think, after going to 2 of those meetings by the, led by the water meter people, I never realized there was so much involved in terms of how water meters worked. And thank God that Chuck and Nate were there to explain it. So it was really their knowledge of water and water distribution systems and everything about water systems is unmatched as far as what we've had in the town DPW for many years. And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I think we all should.
So if you are updating your resumes, make sure you put the Manchester Water Resource Protection Task Force up there and crow a little bit about what you accomplished on it, all of you who participated in this, because you deserve it.
And don't mistakenly abbreviate it WTF.
No, that's not good. And go ahead, please.
I hate to interrupt the congratulations, which are very well deserved. But I've got kind of a process issue. The committee this is the final meeting. Who will be working toward a presentation for the select board at our 2nd September meeting on presenting a more complete presentation of the new water rates?
I'm not sure of the answer to that, and it may in fact be the next agenda item. Is that correct, Sue?
The next agenda item is next steps and new opportunities.
Yeah, I think part of that was making sure everybody had a chance to throw their hat in the ring for one role or another. Because as you know, there are several seats on the sustainability committee that are available for some of us or people like us who want to continue and implement this work. And I assume that would include updating the select board and doing whatever you need to make sure you have all the information you need in September.
I think when the select board anticipated moving some of the publicity and information activities, that was what we thought we were pushing to the sustainability committee. I'm not sure that that's the same people who would be good at explaining the what if cases in the
I wondered about that
Great.
because you did not accept our recommendation for a body with a little bit more responsibility, and which would include things like advising on rates, conducting analysis of test meters, etc. So perhaps that'll get done, and perhaps it won't. I, for one, have run down my batteries on this matter. So the select board is taking a 90-day pause, and I think I'm going to do the same. But I'd invite anybody, and hopefully many of you, to pitch in on sustainability, on education, on whatever the proper scope of next steps is. And we'll have to see what we can do to help the select board take your next steps when the time comes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the floor is open here for anybody who would like to volunteer, who hasn't done already, to concentrate on conservation and education, on outreach. Yes, Jessica.
I guess I guess I'm perhaps intrigued with how this is gonna go forward into the sustainability. I was just on the CZM steering committee grant for that also just wrapped up, and that's supposedly maybe also gonna go under the sustainability committee. So I don't know that I'm ready to fully sign on yet, but I guess I'm curious if anyone knows what the how is that gonna kind of reorganize? Not that I don't think it's an important issue, but I don't know that I want to focus as much on the zero waste stuff, but I think a lot of this other stuff also, for me personally, coincides with stream team work as well. So I'm intrigued with how this moves forward and how it goes under sustainability, but I guess I'm curious how we get more information about how that is going to work.
I'm not sure how to answer that, because sustainability is not, they're not leading this charge. They're perfectly willing to have some more members because they've frankly been so short of membership that they've had trouble with a quorum for the past year. And they met in May, and John Round and I attended that kind of ex officio and said we'd like to bring some of these issues into sustainability, and there was, I believe, good agreement about that, but then the next step was to schedule the next meeting for September. The sustainability doesn't operate in the summer. I don't mean that to sound as critical as it may come out. In other words, I don't think that committee is used to, the degree of diligence and regularity.
Right. Well, I would
pursuit of
say
issues.
stream team also generally doesn't meet in the summer because we do a lot of working days. So, so it sounds like perhaps attending their September meeting is the way to get more information about how this is going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's
I mean,
right.
I guess I
And we
have I guess I have
Good.
my concerns that all of this and sort of the work that the steering committee for the CZM grants and stuff is, I guess I have my concerns about all of that falling, and it's not a reflection on any one person at all in the sustainability committee. I just, my concern of how this really all fits into kind of their mission and how that's going to work, but I can go to that September meeting.
Right. Other comments, suggestions?
Yeah, Steve, I mean, I might comment that really in terms of how it would unfold with whatever individuals are involved, they take their cue really from that 71-page report, and in particular, the first 3 recommendations that we're looking forward to implementing right away and communicating various conservation initiatives to Manchester residents, as well as looking at the pilot study results, or the pilot, not even the results, but the pilot study as it evolves. And it really needs about 2 or 3 different people, one with kind of analytical skills that can look at the data that are coming out of the pilot study and think about what can be done with that data to further our initiatives toward conservation. And then someone else that might be dealing with initiatives associated with communicating that information to not only that information, but general conservation ideas and information to all of the water users. So the report is really the driver for that. The sustainability committee itself is an infrastructure under which we can operate, but the ideas associated with water are really coming from the findings of our group.
Yep, well said. I know we've speculated about various ways to continue. Jeff Koshan, for instance, has spoken about how useful it is to get people to come outdoors, to see the reservoir, conceivably also to see the well, and to talk about what's involved here and what needs to happen. Somehow, I think it often transforms their thinking pretty quickly about our water situation and makes them more aware of their role. I've also picked up a fair amount of from many of the comments coming back to the letter, and also since then from Monday's meeting, a sense that people are looking for something they can do about climate change. So much of it is, global kind of tectonic processes. You can't actually save the polar bears directly in any way, but you can actually affect how much water you use, and in some cases help your neighbors or friends to do the same. So there is a kind of relief from powerlessness in an issue that's kind of got us all by the throat, this global climate change issue. So ideally, that's part of what sustainability would do, and that, you know, that can be a total grassroots effort. Just has to be well organized, a little bit of funding, a lot of volunteer activity. Anybody else? Well, this seems like a good time. I tried to do this before the meeting, but most of you joined in the last 5 minutes before we started to introduce a new face on the screen here, Lily Wainwright, who is a just newly minted summa cum laude graduate of Union College, who is job hunting. So anybody who's looking for a really bright Spanish-speaking poli-sci psych major with a lot of energy should talk to her, but not before. Maybe she has a chance to help us out with some of this implementation, at least organizing the implementation. When we met with the select board, I think in May and then again in June, at least one member, and that'd be Kathy Bellata, who comes from a serious corporate management background in large organizations, expressed a real desire to have a detailed work plan and timetable. And in my experience, though, that's indispensable. She's absolutely right. If you're going to get a complicated set of steps done, you really need to plan it, plan your acts, and then act the plan, as the consultants say. So it's possible that somebody with that kind of youthful energy could actually help us get that kind of plan down on paper.
Thanks so much, Steve, and thanks everyone for having me. And I really hope that this is something I can stay involved with and hopefully help with that, you know, organization and concrete plan. And I'm really excited to get involved with something that's very important.
Thanks, Lily. And I should say that it would be an example of collaboration between Manchester and Hamilton, because that's where Lily currently resides with her family, although her grandmother is a Manchester resident. All right, Sue, what else remains?
Any other items not reasonably anticipated when this agenda was written?
I love that item. Well, I'll throw this open to the public, because I know there were some people who may not have had a chance to say everything they wanted to. I'll limit you to a couple minutes, but please raise your hand if you'd like to speak up. Uh-oh, were we that tough on you? Sorry. Mike Carvalho.
Yeah, Steve, I just want to say thank you for your leadership on this. I think it's worth noting, and maybe going back to this notion of tragedy of the commons, where we tend to overuse resources because we think they're infinite. And when we realize they're not infinite, there's pushback. And I think that that's something that we may be seeing, and we may see more of as this goes forward and the rubber hits the road. But that doesn't make it make our work any less significant. I deal with PFAS now. It seems like every few days it comes up in the context of my work. And as it's been pointed out here, there are some federal regulations that are going to be coming out this fall that will dramatically change how real estate transactions occur and the impact of PFAS on those transactions. And there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the regulated community as to what they're going to mean. I think the guarantee is is that it's going to be significantly more expensive to do this transactional work, and we will have to deal with what we have. And PFAS and PFOAs, you can have all the water in the world, but if we've got to treat every drop that comes out, we're going to be adding a cost that's going to be disproportionately affecting people in our community. And so conservation as a value proposition is very important. I think this committee reflected that through its work and its diligence, and I want to applaud everybody on the committee for making that effort. So thank you.
But I think I've said this before, but it bears repeating that this matter and the recommendations we're making are an opportunity for the town to take some action ahead of any crisis hitting us.
Absolutely.
We can see the PFAS crisis coming. It's not here yet. The regulations have to come in place. That might take a year, it might take 2 years. The time period has to elapse, for us to, those regulations to have some bite. But we can see that one ahead, and there's probably some others that from Chuck's desk you can see pretty clearly. But none of them was with us today, and that's different from a lot of the issues that our town leadership has to deal with all the time. Doesn't make it easier to postpone. If anything, what's the old saying? It's smart to fix the roof while the sun is shining.
Indeed.
And that's what we've been trying to do here, and we'll continue to. All right. Any other matters not reasonably foreseen at the time the agenda was formed? Okay, then we'll say a final thank you and entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. So fitting, Mr. Kehoe. All those in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you and good night, all.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank
Safe
you.
travel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Hi.
Good night.